Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. Such a social crowd here. We love it. Thank you all for being here. It's just another gorgeous day in Scottsdale, and we couldn't be more blessed than to be here with these lovely ladies and all of you. So today's topic is wax on, wax off for the Friday Art Discovery Series. We are going to be diving deep and learning all about a really wonderful ancient painting technique, encaustic. And so we're going to get to hear a couple different versions of how it can be used, and maybe the gals will share a little history of it. So this is going to be a super informative, fun program. And I'm used to being on that end. This is like weird, but right next to me is Gabriella Ituri. Hi guys, from the beautiful San Diego area of California. And next to her is Shari Lyon from Utah, from Spanish Fork. No, American Fork. American, well, there you go. One of those forks. One of the forks. I'm sure there's a lot of them up there in that part of the country. So anyway, my brain just scrambled. But anyway, this is going to be a great fun thing. And I'd love to just start, Gabby, with you. If you could share a little bit about how long you've been an artist, which has been a very long time. And at what point did you dive into encaustic?
Okay, so I've never held a job of any kind. All I've ever done is make something beautiful and sell something beautiful. My career started in the fashion industry. I was making adorned clothing for the music industry back in the 80s. So, dressing Paula Abdul and Madonna and Fleetwood Mac and all these people. And it was really a lot of fun, and it really financed my ability to educate myself in art. And since then, I have painted, I've worked in glass, I've worked in metal, in stone, lots of different mediums with lots of different ways. And one of the things that I love about that is that everything I learn from one medium, I get to bring to the next. So there are things that I do with encaustic that I probably would not do had I not worked with wood or worked with stone. And then about 8 years ago, I was tired of working in stone because it was kind of outweighing me and hurting my body a little bit. And I thought, okay, let's go back to painting. And I remembered seeing encaustic paintings in Egyptian museums when I was a child. And then also every time I would go into a gallery and see other people's encaustic work, I was swooning. There was just this really visceral reaction to how beautiful the medium is. And I taught myself how to work with this.
So that's fantastic. We're going to talk more about your different layers, and I love that word, swooning. And recently I was walking through with a friend who had never seen encaustic. How many of you are familiar with encaustic, by the way? Okay, look at our educated crowd. But for those of you who aren't, you're in the right place. There's many pieces in the show that you're welcome to touch, but probably not encaustic so much. But this friend was just like mesmerized by the texture, because it looks like velvet. I happen to be wearing velvet today because it reminds me of that. So anyway, we'll get back to that. Shari, let's hear from you about how long, when did you discover encaustic?
Okay. Backing up a little bit. So my husband is also an artist. That's all we've done for the last 28 years of marriage. I was a creative person, but starting our marriage and starting his career, we had to kind of focus on his career first, and then kids came along. And so we joke that I did everything for his career except for paint, and he did the painting and I did everything else. As the kids got older though, and about 10 years ago, I was in a gallery, same thing. I saw an encaustic piece and I just fell in love. It actually brought me to tears, and my husband's like, "You're so weird." And I just said, I've got to do this. This is calling me. And so back when we started encaustic, there wasn't a class that you could go take. And it was really hard to find the supplies. It was really hard to find any kind of education. I actually ended up finding someone who was working in encaustic, and I paid her to let me come look over her shoulder for a couple days. But really, with a lot of kinds of art, you get a little bit of foundation, and then you just go play. You just go try things. And So I made a lot of really bad art in the beginning, and I finally kind of settled into something that I loved. And so I feel like I'm building a second art career because I've already done one, and now I get to start working on my own.
Very nice. And I love that you recognize that everything builds on to one another. And isn't that life? I mean, people will ask, how long have you been painting, or how long have you done that? Well, most of us, it's our whole life has brought us to where we are today. And I love that you have the fashion background. That must have been kind of fun or challenging. I don't know.
It was a whole other incarnation for sure.
That's another topic, but anyway.
I've been sworn to secrecy.
Oh, haha. We won't tell. So anyway, but it's just the two of you really both have a different style, but you bring that rich texture. And which one of you would like to maybe talk about the history behind encaustic and how long it's been around? Both of you, maybe, perhaps?
I'm a super nerd about the history of encaustic. So because it's fascinating to me. And to me, it's just an honor to be a part of the history. So encaustic dates back, as far as we have records, dates back to the 5th century BC. And the Greeks were painting with it. Initially, they were using it as a style of sealant for their ships. And it was sort of a way to show your status in society, because if you could afford the very well-known artisans, then your ship got to be extra fancy. And if you couldn't, then you just got a plain old encaustic sealant on your boat. So that was kind of some of the initial history of it. And then around like 1st through 4th century AD, they started painting what were called the Fayum portraits. If you're familiar with those, there's thousands of them that have been excavated out of pyramids. The Greek were painting those in Egypt. They're death masks basically, and they excavate them out of tombs often. Any of the major museums that you go to, if you ask, they will probably have some Fayum portraits on display. And really it goes into like 18th and 19th century. They were excavating artwork out of Pompeii, and they found encaustic artwork. And then really, if you go back to, it kind of died off for just a little bit until you get into the 60s and 70s. If you know, Jasper Johns did some of his flags that he did were encaustic. There was a group of artists that were working with encaustic, but they were experimenting without knowledge. And it caused some real health issues. And so encaustic kind of died again because everyone was afraid of it. But really,
that might be a good point to explain to him what it actually is.
Okay.
And then weave back into the history.
We'll back up. So encaustic it's melted beeswax with a little bit of what's called damar resin. Basically, it's a tree sap of a very specific tree. And that enables the beeswax to cure over time and to give it luster and to give it a hardness. What this group of artists were doing, though, was using a lot of different things in with it. Well, you use heat to manipulate this. And when you put heat with a varnish, that's very toxic. So it kind of dropped in popularity for a long time. And really, it's been in the last 10 years that we've seen it kind of coming back. And I'll tell you, initially, when I started getting into my first galleries, I would talk to different people and they'd be like, we have an encaustic artist. And I'm like, yeah, but you have 10 oil painters. Like, I don't know why, it's like, we have that token encaustic artist, and it's getting better now. And galleries are carrying multiple encaustic artists now, but we're finally making our place in the art world again.
And we're so glad. So the history is fascinating because it's not just something that came to life now. And I think it's because those items or those mediums were readily available back then. They didn't have, when did oil paint first, like in the tube start, like in anybody, we talked about that a few weeks ago. But they had to use, just like the Native Americans, they would use berries and different things. And So the wax was the medium for them to lay on the design.
And you can suspend pigment in it. So any pigment that they had, they could suspend it in the medium, in the beeswax as a medium. So it made it really easy.
Also, there's this really lovely thing about beeswax, which is that it has no bacteria in it, the way honey has no bacteria in it. And what that does is it has made it very eternal. It doesn't actually degrade. It is the most archival medium in the world. So we have those examples from Egypt because nothing ever happened to them short of, I suppose, maybe being in a fire. They're going to last. Your pieces will last, right? There's a natural UV protectant to the beeswax, and for me, that eternal aspect of it really speaks to my personal vision of art. Like, I work a lot with imagery from my dreams. There's an eternal quality to it all, speaking of the soul, and so it kind of fits together really well. That ethereal.
Ethereal is my favorite word. It's just
too.
ethereal.
It is.
And both of your work, absolutely. Your definition ethereal, look at your art. I mean, that's it. So you brought up, each of you brought some great show and tell stuff. I'd like to delve into that a little bit, and then I'd like to get into more specifics about the methodology between each of your work. But yeah, let's start.
So, sorry about my shoebox presentation, but I brought, you probably tilt that and show. So these are colored waxes that I've already made or I've purchased.
Colored with pigment, so they are archival.
Beeswax. Yeah, thank you, exactly. And then this is what I use as my medium, which is beeswax with the resin mixed in. It's a bit like rice, but then once I melt it, of course, it's just sheer. I don't know. Do you know?
It's a tree in Malaysia.
Okay.
I don't know.
We don't know the name, yeah.
It's not a damar tree. I do know that.
Even though it's damar resin.
Yes.
Even though it's damar resin.
I would have guessed damar, but yes. Right. So that is pigment pre-mixed into beeswax, but you can work, as far as I know, you can't work acrylics because they're not compatible. Plastic isn't compatible with beeswax, but alcohol inks and oils and pastels. Yeah. I use gouache. That's really beautiful with it. And I'm sure there are others because the experimentation you can do with encaustic is kind of endless. There are people that sculpt three-dimensionally with encaustic. I've seen exhibits of entire rooms that look like spider webs made out of beeswax. There's some amazing things being done with beeswax or with encaustic in general. Yeah,
let's pass the little box around. We'll start with you.
All right, so in addition to that kind of stuff, these are a few other things that I use, and we'll pass these around too. You can use a heat gun, which just basically looks like a hair dryer, but at very high heats. I like to use my torch. This is my favorite tool, but I also use my wax iron often too. And so it just looks like I'm ironing when I'm working with that. I'll pass this around. This is a little container of the damar resin. This is a sample piece so you can touch it. Don't touch other people's art.
To touch.
Yeah, you can't help it. When you see it, you just want to touch it.
And my friend was petting it. I was like,
I know, we see it all the time.
But he bought them. So.
It's not the end of the world. We just have to buff off a lot of fingerprints. So, and then these are paints that I've made. We can pass these around. This is the encaustic medium mixed with pigment. And so a lot of times I'll mix my color in oil paints, and then I do what's called oiling it out. You let it sit on a paper towel so that as much of the oil that you can comes out, and then you can mix it in the encaustic medium. And then some of my brushes. So we can. Really, you can use just about anything that you can get your hands on to play with encaustic, but it has to be not synthetic brushes. You're working at just under 200 degrees So you can't use plastic brushes, doesn't work well.
Yeah, they shrivel up and melt. It's very
Yeah, they
strange.
do.
Yes.
Do we need the iron? It's kind of bulky with the cord and everything. And you guys know what a torch looks like, right? It's either creme brulee in the kitchen or. Okay, she asked, do you melt the brushes? There's a lot of different ways to work. A lot of times the way I work is I have my hot palette and I have my waxes on it. And I just keep my brushes on the palette so that they stay hot and stay molten. But you can leave it in the paint too. And
That was a good question. Because, okay, let's talk a little bit about how the different ways you can do it. You can lay your color and your mediums on in the background and then coat with encaustic beeswax, or you can actually have the pigment in there. Do you use a combination of both of those techniques?
I use about 3 or 4 different techniques, actually. I tend to start with gouache on French watercolor paper, the way you would begin a painting, especially because I use a lot of geometry in my work. And so whatever is on the paper is going to remain very stable. Gouache is a French pigment that's more opaque than watercolor. And it's also kind of chalky and sits on the surface and lends itself to be picked up by the beeswax and mixed into the beeswax. So once I've played around with that for a while, I will mount that onto a wood panel. Now you do need a hard substrate, and you can't really work on canvas because it would sort of crack, or
like the one that the sample's on when that comes around.
Exactly. And I do like a light wood, like a birch or something that's not going to show through the beeswax or darken the process. So once my paper has been mounted on that, which is its own thing because hot beeswax tends to want to make paper lift off. So I had to really figure out how to do that. And I'm using like a hot mount photography process. So then I will work with the colored beeswax and paint. And then when I think my image is very close to done, I will build a dam, put it on a perfectly level table and actually pull out a level and level it. And then pour clear beeswax over the entire painting in an artistic manner that's going to make clouds or be maybe horizontal or vertical or whatever it is I'm trying to achieve. And also it reactivates everything and drags and blurs and moves pigment around. So I'm sort of trying to create a thin sheet of beeswax that's kind of even, but I'm not touching it with any tool at that point because I really relish the sort of pearlescent surface that leaves, not to brush it or mark it. And so then once it's all cooled and solidified and I've done everything I want to do to it, then I will build my lovely edge, which I think makes it look like a very finished object.
It's almost like a little mat on the side.
Yeah, like it will glow, like light will hit it or pick it. It'll pick up light in a beautiful way. And then I'm also sort of working that wax backward to seal it to the wood.
What do you build your dam out of? So that would be coming up the edges so you can get a layer across the top. What do you use?
I'm using painter's tape. Yeah. It will hold the beeswax from pouring over the edge and it's enough. Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. And besides gouache, you use, I think both of you use some beautiful gold or.
I use 24 karat gold leaf, but I'm a mixed media artist, so I am incorporating Indian inks, graphite, different kinds of paper, all kinds of things that will end up making the image I want in the end. And I'm very experimental, so it's kind of always changing. Like the show itself has really affected how I work or influenced me because I don't really work wax here. I think I work with it a lot hotter than you do. So I wear a respirator. So here I have tended to start working more with the paper and the gouache and the painting. That's the under layer far more time than I normally would at home. So it's an ever evolving process.
And why do you use so much geometry in your pieces?
Well, I think I have a wannabe architect inside me, and I have an engineer's mind. But for me, I'm sort of trying to open a door and let you into the restful, meditative place inside the painting. I work with dreams with people, like how Carl Jung would do therapy. And there's this beautiful, like for me, the landscapes are the indomitable nature of the soul, the space inside you that is the soul's vessel. And the mind is a geometric construct in our dreams. It's always a box of some sort. And so you really need one to explain to you and to open the door. Like you literally have to understand yourself in order to go into that restful, meditative, healing place. So the geometry kind of works with the whole thing for me. I know it's sort of like method to my madness.
I love it. The secrets behind what they do. That's great. Thank you. And Shari, tell us a little bit more about your techniques and your different mediums that you use in creating your look. And then how do you get your finish has a little bit more texture, where Gabby's is a little bit more of the smooth, velvety.
Yeah, if you meet an encaustic artist, everyone that you meet is going to work differently. And that's what's so fun about it, is because it's unlimited the way you can work with encaustic. So my process is more of a building layers process. So my images are all built from the back forward. I start with encaustic gesso on my boards because I want my final piece to be able to take the light in through all the layers and bounce it back out so that there's illumination in my pieces. So my pieces, by the time I'm done, there will be 10 to 15 layers in them. And it's a difference in how I am using my temperatures and how I'm using my brush and how I'm using my heat source. So different heat sources, like I say, I've got an iron, I've got a heat gun, I've got a torch. And then, if you dip your brush into the molten beeswax and you let it cool for just a second on your brush before you use it, it's going to do different things than if you take it straight from the heat and use it. So there's just a lot of variables that you can play with there. And so every day in the studio is just exciting and fun because you can just play. So sometimes my pieces are very smooth and very silky, and sometimes I like a whole lot of texture in them, and that's just a difference in those three things, just variables of those three things. So once I'm done building all my colors and my layers, generally speaking, I don't always put them on, but generally speaking, I end with some kind of tree. I have a tree fetish. I don't know what that is. I've always had it. I think it's amazing that trees are important. Most religions, most cultures, like just about anywhere you go in the world, trees have a place that's of importance. And I think they communicate a lot. I think I don't know, they're just very inspiring to me. And there's nothing, I live in Utah, I hate snow. But the thing that I love about the winter is a naked winter tree. And those, I take my camera out and I catch as many as I can. So to do the black contrasting parts, I start that on the computer, and I start it with either a photograph, or sometimes I'll license an image that if I need something specific that I haven't been able to photograph, and I create the image on the computer. I have a printing process that I then go to, and then I transfer on a special paper into my wax. And so by burnishing and creating friction, it creates heat, just enough heat to pull that ink down into the wax. Not my favorite part of it. It's not creative, it's boring, and it gives my shoulder too much of a workout. But so that's kind of, do you ever use a hot iron in that process, or is it literally just transferring by pressure? Yeah, the transfer process is just burnishing, just getting that friction going.
Okay.
So that one's boring. But the iron comes in, this piece on the very end, you can see I use the iron a lot on that one. So if you want to kind of see like the textures that the iron creates, that's a fun one. It's also a fun way that you can ruin it really fast if you're not careful. So you have to be very light-handed with that one. But the rest of these are all done with a torch. That's my preferred method. I like to play with fire.
Good to know. Do you make creme brulee?
No.
Okay. You save your skill for the art.
Yes.
So, okay, we've talked a little bit about the touching. So what happens, I mean, it is a little bit of a fragile medium. And by the way, you just explained beautifully why anybody should consider having more than one encaustic artist, because you each have your own style,
different.
completely different. It's just like a, oil painter who uses more texture or less texture. There should be no limit. So what was I saying before that? Before I interrupted myself? Oh, fingerprints. Yeah. So like we had a little piece the other day that like got a little bit of a nick. That we don't want that to happen, but if it does, what is the solution?
Well, it's interesting because you just said you can easily ruin a piece, and there is, in the process of making encaustic, there are pieces where I will make a piece and I'll kill it, like it just is ruined, right? In a way, the way a potter will stick something in a kiln, something pieces will crack, right? But the beauty of encaustic too is that, let's say you take it home and something does happen to it, you can probably bring it back to me and I can repair it, both using a heat gun or sometimes the warmth of my hand or bringing new wax into the piece. They can be repaired. It's different, yeah, and I mean it's really archival, but it is sort of sensitive. But then kind of every painting is like I would never stick my fingernail in an oil painting, or little bits can chip off. I mean, every piece of artwork is sensitive in its own way.
Extreme temperatures. Oil paintings don't do well with extreme temperatures. These don't do well with extreme temperatures. But
well, and there are a lot of famous paintings that are actually coated in encaustic to protect them because it is a perfect preserver.
yeah, it's very archival.
Well, and the fact that you talked about that earlier, there's no bacteria.
Right.
I mean, that had literally never occurred to me, and I'm fairly educated in caustic, but that is why it sustains itself for decade or millennia.
Yeah, it won't change. Yeah. And when you think about it, even a honey, right? Like it can be almost like an antibiotic. I mean, there's something really magical about it. And I understand that what you meant, like it brought you to tears. There's something I have worked in glass too for the same reason. And there's something about the way light goes through encaustic that
And
is
the smell.
it's visceral. It is just like it's just so beautiful. And now we sound like the Mutual Admiration Society, but it's just a beautiful medium. That's why we work in it, right?
My husband laughs because the first couple layers that I do are just very smooth, and he catches me over in my side of the studio, just kind of just rubbing my encaustic pieces. It's very soothing.
And I was in your studio the other day, and I'm like, oh, it smells so good, because it was just this sweet smell of honey.
Yeah.
And I was part of the magic. I've never walked up to him, sniffed him. I think it was actually your hot, molten wax.
Yeah, when it's hot,
it's not
really
the dry
delicious.
pieces, but yeah, I mean, it is, to me, it's very mesmerizing how you can transform, a very detailed imagery, like some of your transfers, but once you get the wax over it, it takes it into that ethereal land that you both love and represent so well. So tell us about these birds, because we know you like trees, but
yeah, it mostly love trees, but give me a good raven. And the ravens are amazing. They're very intelligent. I don't know, they're kind of my spirit animal a little bit. Like they just represent flight and freedom, and I don't know, they're beautiful. I love them. I love the shapes that they make in flight. And so I do pop out with a little bird piece every once in a while when I'm feeling it.
And give a raven a shiny thing, and they're like a raccoon. They're like, oh, look what I have, right?
Yeah, they're very intelligent birds, and
Definitely
that's cool.
Used in a lot of art. lot of different artists have incorporated them, both sculptural and paintings, because there is such a mystic about them. So,
And there's something so, I mean, I think birds are so symbolic of freedom, right? Of being able to fly, of, yeah.
okay, and then both of you, we see copper leaf, gold leaf. Why do you like that medium with the encaustic?
Well, for me, it goes back to my dream world. Like it's almost like I live Game of Thrones at night. Like I have a whole other life. But you know, Carl Jung really talked about how dreams help us heal as being an alchemy, right? To turn base metal into gold. That is really what therapy is. It's any sort of spiritual work is a healing, and so gold is very symbolic of that. And I'm using it symbolically in my images to represent that, the arc of healing a soul by knowing ourselves.
It's beautiful. I love that. Everybody needs to come up and look at these more closely. And this oval and circle is also, it's not geometry, it's
Yeah, well, they say that the journey into the soul is a downward spiral of getting deeper, and it goes around in circles, ever getting deeper, right? But also, when someone has a radical sense of self-acceptance of their own feelings, it's kind of scary. It's a bit like riding a roller coaster. You're gonna feel swoopy, spinny, turny, and that shows up a lot in my work.
swoopy, those technical words. I love
Yeah,
that.
it's like yummy. Encaustics are yummy.
It's like yummy. Okay. What has been the biggest challenge for each of you in dealing with this medium and in expressing to the general public who may not understand it, like what it is? Or are there no challenges?
No, it is challenging because if anyone walks up to an oil painting, they know what to expect. They know what to do with it and they understand it. Every single person that sees my work, I have to explain it. And the questions, is it going to melt? You know, is it going to scratch? Is it going to, and so it gets a little rough to answer that over and over, but I understand. And so I acknowledge that if I can educate, then we create more encaustic collectors, because once you understand what it is and you know the history and you know about it, then you're going to fall in love with it too, once we get rid of all the what ifs. So temperature wise, like I tell people, if it's living with its humans, it's happy. Encaustic doesn't live well in a car in the middle of the summer. Neither does a human. And so anywhere the humans live that own the encaustic, it will be fine. It will scratch. An oil painting will scratch. So on the wall, it's going to be happy. You know, it really is just basic fine art care. And if you apply anything you would with caring for another piece of fine art, it's the same rules for encaustic. And I have had collectors pick up a piece from my gallery, and she ran a little errand on the way home and called me and said, "Oh no." She said, "I was only in there a second." And I said, "Yeah, but it's in the middle of the summer and it was in your car." And I was able to repair it. That's another thing that is just, it really is very repairable most of the time. So it doesn't need to be a worry as long as you're just basic fine art care, you know, with it. The thing with encaustic though is that you can dust it and buff it and use a wet cloth on it. I mean, it's actually a little more durable when it comes to that kind of stuff. If you ever, I actually buff mine with the palm of my hand. So you make sure that your hand's clean and then you just go at it, you know, so they are very durable. It just doesn't feel like it would be.
Definitely easier to clean than a real impasto oil painting where you can't get in. You have to use a air gun.
Cans, yeah.
So, okay, that's beautiful. How about you? Challenges?
Well, I think the challenge for me at first was learning how to use it. Like, how do I in my youth, I painted almost photorealism. And so I had to completely give up any idea that was going to happen. And I kind of wanted to do that. I wanted to to be sort of looser and freer in what I was expressing. So for me, encaustic was kind of perfect because it is difficult to control. With that said, though, there's this, explaining to people, yeah, that it is the wonderful medium it is, and that it's going to do just fine in your house is challenging. And mostly for me, because I really want to get to the part where I can talk about what I paint and why I paint that, like what is my vision or what is my inspiration, rather than the technicalities of it. And then maybe figuring out how it travels has been challenging. I float mine in a box, so nothing but air touches it. How to ship it. And once you figure it out, it's fine, but it was a process to get to the point where I understood how to do that. So that was maybe another challenge. And but mostly it's kind of been a delight.
And going back to the challenge of controlling encaustic, I always explain to people that working in encaustic is kind of like having a toddler or a teenager. You have like your wide barriers, and it's just going to bounce off of those all over the place. And you kind of know what your boundaries are, but you've got to be free and flowing to move with it.
But then I find, don't you find like though, because it's so unknown in a way, it also, you get these happy accidents.
I was gonna say,
right?
happy accidents.
You get a lot of like, your experimentation actually tends to go really far. Like
Yeah.
I'm constantly discovering something new. Like I said, the show really changed how I worked with a lot of encaustic, just by having the limitation of being indoors with people, right? Like then you're not wearing respirators, so I had to figure out new ways to play. And I think play is really an important word. Like you have to have patience. You really can't play. You have to be willing to walk in not knowing anything, or not being the wise artist savant.
You leave your ego at the door.
Yeah,
when
you leave
work
your
with
ego at the
encaustic.
door. Huge. Yes, exactly that. It's a humbling process.
I always laugh because I talk about how free working with encaustic is, but I'm a super type A person and I'm a real control freak. And so encaustic makes no sense that I would work in it. But anyone who knows encaustic laughs because you see all the like straight lines and the horizon lines. And for encaustic, this is very rigid, but to me, it feels very free. So
I think that's interesting you're saying that, because actually we have that same person, like, right? I have the engineer brain. Like it's kind of interesting, right?
My
We're both
husband says
working
it's
in the
my
hardest
therapy.
thing.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, because we have to overcome our
Yeah.
nature to actually do something that's kind of scary. Like
Yeah.
as an artist, though, if you're not a little scared, you're not in the right place. Like I think really, truly excavating our soul and what we want to express is a very vulnerable process, and encaustic is really vulnerable.
It's very vulnerable. And I think, being in the studio and working in encaustic is like this one place that I've given myself permission to not be in control. And so my husband says all the time that it's the cheapest therapy, because I go in there and it's just like, I'm able to just like let go of my brain for a second. And that's not easy for me to do. He loves to work in the studio with music, and I love just silence. I love to go in my studio and just have silence, because it's the only time my brain is quiet when I'm working with it. So
I love that. And I think we learn every week that just like any life, any person, the road to being an artist is problem solving and giving yourself permission to fail and trying something different, thinking outside the box. It's beautiful when we see, and we definitely see that here, artists that continue to, reach new heights and try something new. And it's one of the magic elements of the celebration of fine art is all the artists' energy pushes each other to be better and gives people new ideas and new perspectives. And you definitely, like you came here and you realized, oh, I can't actually work with the wax at the temperature you do with the resin in it around people, but you found a way to do the beautiful work on the substrate and then do that at home. But you guys, I just can't compliment you enough for the the joy that you bring to us, the viewer, as you grow and overcome the challenges, and bringing a medium such as this to all of us. So yay for you.
From the first day I met you, I think one of the first things I ever said to you was, upon arriving and being here for a few months, was, this is fertile territory. This show is fertile territory. It pushes you to grow. It pushes you to, and we do get the beauty of, like, art is kind of a loner sport, right? Like, right. And so, but here we can talk shop with each other. We can have discussions about what inspires us with other artists. So it is really, truly fertile territory. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. And it is for us, the viewer, too, right? Would you agree? Yeah. I'm inspired every day. So, and yes, I'm sure we have questions. So I think I have a mic there, Beth, if you want to turn that on. So we love questions. Even those of you online, feel free to.
I'm just intrigued by the title, encaustic. Can you break down that word?
It's a Greek word and it means to burn in. So references using heat.
Yeah, caustic is heat. Yeah. Okay.
So burn in. And how did the beeswax become part of that?
I think it was just something they had available.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
it was a
and-
sealer.
And they knew that it was, I mean, you know, they preserved with it. And so I think it just, they went, what would happen if? And then they started adding pigment and it became an art form.
Well, you talked about the ships, and the way I had heard the story was that the people sealing the ships wanted images of the gods to help them sail the seas, and so that inspired them to mix the pigments in with the beeswax. But somebody recently pulled out of the ocean these giant blocks of beeswax that were thousands of years old, that had survived under the ocean for that long. So it is what was available for sure. And it is an amazing thing. Like, we seal furniture with it. We use it for makeup. We use it for lipstick. I mean, it's everywhere, right?
We polish cars with it. Wax on, wax off. Yeah. Excellent. Right over here, please.
Right row. Okay, 2 questions. One, I'm into words as a writer. How do you spell encaustic? Is it E-N or A-N?
E-N.
That's what I thought. C-A-U-S-T-I-C, encaustic.
Yeah.
Burning within. Got it. Okay. Second question, curiosity. So you're working with extreme heat and creating these lovely pieces of art. So can they withstand, let's say somebody got stupid, left their painting, their encaustic piece of art out in the Arizona sun. Would it withstand that or not?
I guess I would say, please don't. You're just,
Sorry.
yeah. In your
My
home,
father was a chemist. I just had to
Yeah.
pose that question. Not that we would do that to your art.
Well, in your
crying out
home, it's
loud.
going to be fine. I lived in Fallbrook for a long time, and I had no AC in my house, and it would get pretty hot. It was always fine. Yeah.
So basically, the medium will withstand extreme temperatures up to a point.
Yeah. If your house gets hot enough for your encaustic to melt, you need to call your architect.
Well, and
But-
back to your encaustic art loves to live with its human. Wherever its human
Yeah.
lives, it's happy.
Yeah.
So be buddies.
Yeah, and it always just seems like a second when we leave something in the car, and
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah,
do
do that.
errands with your encaustic.
I suppose if you knew you were leaving your house with no AC for a really long time, I would just say, take your encaustic down and lay it flat in a dark room, and you'll be fine.
yeah, I was gonna say that, but yeah, and if the cat jumps up on your painting and scratches it, that's for my mom who's got a crazy cat. Yes, please.
GWASH? It's thank you.
Gouache.
Gouache, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's a French word.
Weird.
Oh,
It's a very opaque watercolor.
Yeah.
And I will say, I'm not sure if you have it, but on your show your, Shari has a great card that kind of has the over,
Them I made.
like, do you want to just read that? Because
So on the back of my cards, it says encaustic, meaning to burn in or fuse, is an ancient painting medium first practiced by Greek artists as far back as the 5th century BC. The oldest known pigment binder, encaustic combines molten beeswax with dry pigment, tree resin. It says I also incorporate oil paint, metal, gold leaf, pan pastels, charcoal, and graphite.
so it's interesting because it is obviously, we've talked about how it can withstand time, and we found a pile of beeswax under the ocean.
Yeah.
But
And the Fayum
water, I
portraits,
know.
there's thousands of Fayum
yeah, and
portraits, and they're
we've sealed boats
they're
with it.
beautiful.
So it's very durable, but as an art form, yeah, you want to be mindful of it just like you would anything else for sure. But yeah, it's very, very fascinating. Yes.
How did these things, these art encaustic things survive in Egypt for thousands of years?
In tombs,
In tombs.
inside the pyramids.
So the temperature didn't get hot in there.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. And my second question, sorry. Are there any men that do encaustic?
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned Jasper Jones, right?
Yeah, Jasper Jones. There was a whole group, and they were all actually men because women weren't really accepted in the art world back then.
It's been a man's world in art for a very, very long time. It's only now that women are really starting to be recognized, which I think is kind of a shame. Like, if you look at even statistically how many women are in museums versus how many men are in museums, it's kind of ridiculous, really. And so, like, that's why certain, like Frida Kahlo, for instance, is so women have had to push to be in that world.
Perhaps some worked under an assumed name.
Often.
Yes, and often
Initials.
and often they were also maybe married to a famous artist, right? So yeah. Yeah.
Good questions. Yeah. We love questions. Okay. Beth, you want to grab back there?
Is all beeswax the same? Over the years, there must have been hundreds of different varieties of bees. Is the substance they make the same over the
I think the honey varies by the kind of trees and the plants that are around it, right? I don't know if the beeswax itself varies. Do you know?
The way you can get it varies. Like, you can get it very raw, you can get it the way I use the beeswax. I make my own medium, so when I buy the beeswax, I buy mine. It's pharmaceutical grade, and so it's very refined. But you can also buy it very yellow. So you can use, if you're making medium, you can buy it very natural, and it'll create a very, very warm encaustic medium. So it comes in different different forms, but I don't know about the structure of it if it changes.
But I think bees in general, they'll all make beeswax that's very chemically consistent. It's the honey that will vary.
That's a great question. And how do you source? I mean, are you going through like a middle person? Like, you're not going out to your beehives?
No, I buy from a company called Encaustico, and they clean the beeswax to pharmaceutical grade, and then they add in the resin for me. I don't actually have that part. And there's something really nice about knowing that the beeswax is clean, because pollen is life and it will assert itself. And I would hate a penny to end up yellow. So knowing that the beeswax is really clean is part of what makes it archival.
And I love to make my own medium because it's part of the process for me. I have a big cauldron that has a spigot, and I love feeling like a witch sometimes. And so I love working in my cauldron, and I make big, huge batches at a time. So I do buy my beeswax separate from my resin, and I make that together, but it's much easier to buy it already made.
But you got to fill your need.
Got to have my
Sister.
witchy ways.
Get that cauldron going. That's great. Do you ever run out of ideas of what to make?
Well, being that my inspiration is my dreams, I'm sort of backlogged. There's like a lot of dreams and a lot of imagery and a lot to play with. And I tend to work on a body of work sort of in my mind for long periods of time until it sort of reaches a point where it just has to be expressed. Like for a while now, I've been wanting to work a figurative body of work that expresses the dream work in a way that, like, there was a dream I read that someone had a while ago in a Carl Jung book. He was talking about how a girl was laying with her chest cavity open, almost like open heart surgery, and she was laying in a pool of her own tears, and the tears were being poured in her heart to heal her heart. What that is expressing is that you cannot heal what you cannot feel. You have to actually feel your feelings to heal anything. Well, what a beautiful way to express that. And so in my mind, I've been working on this figurative body of work for a really long time, and it's like getting close. Like I can start to feel the itchiness of wanting to dive in, which will probably happen this summer. But there's no shortage of ideas, really. There's just not enough time.
Yeah, and every little idea lends itself to a whole series a lot of times. And I've done figurative work too. And I get like with my ravens, every once in a while, there's just like this thought. For me, sometimes it's things that are going on in my world. So these last couple of years, I've had a lot of things to work with. And so it's how I translate and how I work through what I'm living. And so those little series kind of pop up, and last year, I did a series where I had a model come in and I did a photo shoot with her to communicate some things that I wanted to communicate. And it's fun to just play with different ideas every once in a while.
And I think a lot of us in the last couple of years, there was a lot of transition that happened. And since there was a period of time that a lot of artists didn't get to go out and do shows like they normally would, and
we joke that we've been training our whole life for these last couple of years.
So that you could stay home and work. Yeah. But there's a lot. I mean, when the show started last year and again this year, the work is phenomenal. And I think it's because so many artists took that time to just really dive deep. And
we were all hibernating.
Yes, and
yes.
Boy, they came back with just amazing work. And then those of us who love the work were like so hungry to see it and enjoy it. It's been really, elevated the joy factor, I think.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised at how kind of painful it was not to show. Like the work was just accumulating, there was just more and more and more of it. And there was this sort of sadness to not being able to share it with the world. I'm far more in love with the process than the actual object that is made. I'm so happy to see it walk out my booth and into your home, because then it makes room for more work and another idea that gets to explore, and I get to play some more. And it's really that spirit. And also with the last 2 years being difficult, making art is catharsis. It's healing. It is like, even what I just said, you can't heal what you can't feel. Well, making art is feeling.
Artists have the feels, and a lot of it.
Yeah. It's such a gift.
Some of us just sat at home and like, what else can I eat? And you guys were creating. I mean, yay, thank goodness.
So we ate too, though.
We have to soothe ourselves. Yes. We like to do the microphone so that the people listening in can hear too.
Thank you, ladies. Really beautiful work. I think a lot of us are very excited to see the process and to hear you speak about your work. What comes to mind is your artistic choice to create a frame or no frame to your pieces. Very interesting to see that. And the second, Gabi, I love the fact that you're sharing how much you're healing with the work, and that you're inviting us to go into that process of healing. And there's something really magical about you massaging your work. And that's something I think, as a feminine appreciation of our work, we can relate to that. And it's nice to see that the men too can appreciate women's artwork and how it's a process of healing. So thank you for sharing that intuition and that inner wisdom as a female artist. We applaud you for that.
Thank you.
Well said, as always.
I guess I could start. So, having worked in stone and other mediums that were very exacting, I have fallen in love with a well finished object. I like something that is complete and looks, maybe I should say, I have a knack for making things look luxurious. So for me, I hire a cabinet maker who makes my frames with walnut wood on the edges because I think it's so rich and goes with a lot of furniture and has this mid-century modern feel to it. And I like how tall the pieces are off the wall because I think that gives it presence. So many times once it gets on the wall, you really, after a while, you'll be like, oh, like look at the great shadows that makes, and that becomes part of the painting. It lends a presence to it. So while I have had people frame my pieces like in a floating frame so that you could still see the wood, but it adds size maybe to the piece. I really love presenting them this way. And the edge that I make, I'm literally dabbing wax I go 4 times around, which is kind of a lot. The viscosity of the liquid wax being thick, and the surface tension becomes very rounded. So it's making that really lovely edge, which is kind of a labor of love for me. But the whole thing lends itself to look like a beautifully finished object. That's my aim.
Beautiful.
And I'm kind of all over the place with it because I do like to frame my work, but also my work a lot of times can be very flexible. You can see it in a very contemporary setting, and you put the right frame on it and it can be in a Southwestern setting and still look right at home. And so I try to keep mine very minimal so that people can take it and they can frame it however they want to fit their home. I do have some really awesome frames though back in my booth, and I have a frame maker that just, when I have an idea or I have a series I want to do, I just, I'm like, okay, I need you to make my round ones back there. I'm in love with those. I said, I need you to make me a bunch of round frames. And he's like, round frames. And so he had a great way that he did that for me. I have a piece that I did last year, one of my figurative pieces that I went in and I said, okay, I need a frame. I want a big, huge tabernacle. It's like this tall from the ground. So I want 5 holes in it, panels that I can do. And I want the middle one to be round. And then the tops are kind of like diamonds. And so I drew this all out and he was just like, wow. So he said, I'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. And he did. And it's beautiful. So sometimes I'll do the frames before I do the pieces because that's what I'm wanting to work with. But a lot of times I'll just do a real simple finish on the edge and kind of allow you to take that now and make it yours. Just kind of depends.
Well, one of the things we talked about this morning is the painting doesn't end at the edge of the canvas. I mean, it's the whole presentation. So that was a great observation and question for
Actually,
the girls.
that's an interesting point. So when I make these gestural pieces, like the piece on the end, one of the things that I love about it is that there's this hoopty dancing line that connects all 3 of the shapes, and it goes off the edge of the painting because it's implying that it goes endlessly connecting all of us to each other, right? It doesn't end there. It literally just continues forever. So actually, thanks for pointing that out or prompting me somehow.
Exactly. That's one of my favorite new thoughts is that it doesn't end at the end of the canvas because part of the art is how it connects to the viewer, and that takes on its own spiraled identity. So yeah. Okay. Wow. Wendy.
Gabby, I just have to ask this. I can see the geometry and I can think about the dreams and whatever, intrigued with the differences for other pieces. And when I was at your booth looking, and I was seeing the softness on the side and the difference in the texture and the fine lines through and the detail that there were. And I thought, well, how do you do that? What is it? And you showed us those big brushes, but how do you get that tenderness the side of your painting? It's almost like an abstract. And then those fine, fine lines down. That intrigues me.
Well, so my body of work might look like it's all over the place, and I understand that. Oh, no, thank you. I guess so. There are different aspects of the way I would express my dream life, and that each one kind of relates to that, even though they're all about that. So my father was into origami, and I loved that as a child. I loved seeing paper folded and unfolded on a page, and I would aim to learn the origami by refolding it, trying to refold it back how he had it once I had unfolded it. The way light hits a fold of paper is beautiful. It's dark on one side and light on the other, and it reflects light a certain way. So I was very inspired by my father's love of origami to make my lines look like they're folded, like there's this lot, this curvature to it. Now, how I'm doing that is rendering. I'm working with, you saw me working with big brushes, but I do work with pen and pencil, and and I'm painting one side darker and one side lighter and highlighting certain things. So that it's a rendering skill, but the idea came from my father's love of origami.
Great inspiration. Good question. I can check our time. We are just about at the end, but we're happy to take if there's any more questions here or online. Anyone? Okay, so I just want to thank you ladies so much for bringing the beauty and the messaging and sharing the history and the details of this beautiful art form. And hopefully, has everybody learned a little bit more? All right, yay. And thank you, girls. And we invite you to see their studios. Shari's is just in the north tent, straight down this aisle, and Gabriella is around the corner, kind of a wraparound. So I invite you to, come closer here to look at their work, or to go to their studios and investigate a little bit more. And we thank you so much for your time, for being here today, and appreciate you, and hope maybe you'll join next week. I think it's the composition of art next week. So we learn something every weekend. So thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.